guys, are you ready for Chapter 2 of Dinosaur Boy? Here we go. Chapter 2, Fitting In. My mom didn't understand why I would be nervous on my first morning back to school as a part dinosaur. "Sweetie," she said, bending down to fold the collar of my polo shirt underneath my topmost plate. I shivered. The holes in the back of my shirt made it a bit drafty. "You have a gift that is extraordinarily rare. You should be proud. Tell me you're proud to be who you are." "Sure," I said. My dad gave me slightly different advice. "Don't let the other kids give you a hard time," he told me. "Hold your head up high. Make every kid in your class wish they had plates and a tail." Since my dad seemed to be somewhat more aware of the reality of my situation than my mom, I decided to repeat his words to myself as I grabbed my lunch and headed for the front door. My mom ran after me with my jacket, which she had just finished altering to fit over my plates. When I turned so she could help me into it, she drew in a deep, sharp breath. "Sawyer," she admonished, "have you lost a tennis ball?" I looked over my shoulder. One of my spikes had indeed managed to shake itself loose of its protective covering and was now alarmingly exposed in all of its razor-sharp glory. Behind me, there was a long gash in the carpet that marked the path I had taken from the kitchen to the hallway. Yikes. I tried to think how the tennis ball could have come off. I couldn't recall getting it stuck on anything. But before I could rack my brain too hard, Fanny, remember that's the dog, came tearing out of the kitchen. She streaked by my mom and me and ran upstairs, a yellow tennis ball clenched securely in her jaws and an unmistakable gleam of triumph in her large brown eyes. I sighed. From the beginning, the only flaw in the tennis ball plan had been Fanny's rabid love for them. And ever since we had returned from the lake, she had been growing increasingly bold in her attempts to steal them off my spikes. I heard my mom sigh too. "Sorry," I said guiltily. Mom looked down at the torn-up carpet and bit her lip. "No worries, dear. Let's just get it back on and then get you to school, okay?" That turned out to be easier said than done. We were out of extra tennis balls, and Fanny was not at all inclined to give hers up. When we were unable to coax her from underneath my parents' bed, where she had hidden to chew her prize in peace, we had no choice but to stop at a sporting goods store on the way to school to buy a replacement. That made me officially late. By the time I had skewered the new tennis ball onto the exposed spike and walked into the classroom, the bell had rung and everybody else was already in their seats. The door to the classroom was in the back, and all the desks were facing the front. So when the door thumped shut behind me, every single kid in my class turned around in his or her seat to stare at me. I felt my heart start to beat faster. I had kind of expected this, given my new dinosaur-ness, and that didn't make it any easier to handle. I had never been one of those kids who likes attention. If I could have disintegrated into a puddle on the floor and disappeared, I would have. But I couldn't. Instead, I just had to stand there, with my dinosaur-ness on full display, so that everybody could get a good, long look. I tried not to stare back at anybody, but suddenly it seemed like there was nowhere safe for me to rest my eyes. I was relieved to finally find Elliot in the crowd. He was sitting in the back row with his long legs stretched out into the aisle, and he was smiling at me, instead of staring with his mouth open like everybody else. To be fair, Elliot had been receiving email updates, complete with pictures, on my condition all summer, and the rest of the class hadn't. When our eyes met, Elliot gave me a nod and a wave, as though there were nothing unusual going on that day at all. I knew I'd be able to count on Elliot. "Hello," came a voice from the front of the room. "You must be Sawyer." "I am Miss Filch." I looked up, and at first I had a hard time finding our teacher. That was because she was sitting on the floor at the front of the room beside a large TV, angrily punching buttons on an old-looking DVD player. She held up one long bony finger and pointed to an empty seat in the front row. "Please take your seat. I'll be with you as soon as I get this figured out." I looked uncertainly at where she had pointed. It was the only unoccupied seat in the room. There were 5 rows of desks between me and it, with only a narrow aisle in between them. There was no way my dinosaur butt was going to fit through there. I wasn't sure what to do, so I just stood where I was. Miss Filch continued to fight with the DVD player. The TV screen remained blank, and she began to mutter under her breath. Clearly, she did not appreciate my dilemma. My classmates didn't seem to get it either. Most of them were throwing me confused stares and exchanging glances that clearly said, "What's his problem?" Even Elliot looked at me questioningly. I turned slightly so he could see the width of my tail. Elliot nodded in understanding. He pulled his legs out of the aisle and scooted his desk a few inches to the left. Then he threw a meaningful look at Gary Simmons, the second tallest kid in our class, who sat on the other side of the aisle. Gary hurried to copy Elliot and moved his desk a few inches out of the way. So did the kids sitting in the other 4 rows. Relieved, I walked carefully up the slightly wider aisle toward my desk. Kids leaned out of the way to avoid my plates. Emma Hecht, who sat directly behind the empty desk I was headed for, gave a tiny shriek as one of my tennis balls bounced off her sparkly pink Converse. Other than that, there was total silence. So not bad so far. Until the whispers started. Uh-oh. Unreal, I heard someone murmur behind me. Gross, I heard someone else say. Wow, a third somebody breathed. Just wow. Do all dinosaurs have tennis balls? That last one had to be Ernie Hobbs. He had been in my class since kindergarten, and he'd never been very smart. By then, I had made it to the front row. I felt a tiny surge of pride at my achievement, which quickly faded when I got a good look at my desk. It was the kind with a small writing surface that was bolted to the front of the chair. I had sat in just this sort of desk since first grade, but I had never noticed until this morning just how small they were. All the eyes in the room, except for Miss Filch's, remained on me. I started to sweat as I formed a plan. All I had to do was get myself into my seat. Then class would start and everybody would forget about me. For a little while. Be smooth, I told myself. Be cool. I was going to have to go in, spikes first. That much was obvious. So I turned slightly to the side and reached down, smoothly, coolly, to grab the end of my tail. But I missed. My tail whipped to the opposite side like it was purposefully trying to do the least helpful thing it could. I turned the other way to try and grab it before it could hit anything, but it was too late. One of my tennis ball spikes caught the straps of Emma's pink Hello Kitty backpack and flung it halfway across the room. Oh, boy, poor Sawyer. Spraying paper clips and hair clips in all directions. Oh, no. I whipped around to apologize to her, which made my tail swing high in the opposite direction. It knocked all the books off the desk to my right. Oh, I'm so sorry, I exclaimed, fighting the urge to turn quickly and face the desk's occupant, Parker Douglas. Remaining absolutely still was the only thing I could think of that would prevent the further destruction of my immediate area. Dude, be careful with that thing, Parker grumbled. I didn't have to look at him to know that he was probably scowling. Parker, the skinniest kid in our entire grade, always had a long face, partly because his face was literally very long and oval-shaped, and partly because he frowned a lot. Chill, Parker, Emma scolded him from behind me. It's not like he hurt anyone. She gave me a tiny smile as she jumped out of her seat, and I watched enviously as she zigzagged easily through the desks, picking up her stuff as she went. I'm really sorry, I muttered to them both. Just get in your seat, I ordered myself. This will all be over once you get your butt in your chair. Gritting my teeth, I turned to one side once more, willing my tail to cooperate. This time, I was able to grab it and thread the spikes through the square-shaped opening in the back of the chair. The tennis balls bounced slightly as my spikes hit the floor, making my tail do a little dance. There were muffled giggles behind me. My cheeks felt like they were on fire. They must have been bright red by now, which probably made me look even more ridiculous. The tips of my plates also felt hot, like they were embarrassed too. I was still only halfway in my chair, so I had no choice but to turn my back on the gigglers and sit down. I sucked in a breath and wedged myself painfully into the narrow space between the desk and the chair. In order for all of my plates to fit, I had to sit with the front of my chest pressed uncomfortably against the edge of the desk. I was crammed in so tightly I couldn't even take a breath, and several of my plates went bent at strange angles. Was I going to have to sit like this for the entire day? Before I could worry about it too much, there was a loud scraping sound to my right. Parker, having piled his books back onto his desk, was now scooting his chair a few inches away from mine. His two close-together eyes dared me to say something about it. I looked away, over toward Mary Bishop, who had the desk on the other side of me for the second year in a row. Mary was staring straight ahead. Her right eye twitched a little, which I think meant she knew that I was looking at her, but she didn't turn to look at me. Instead, she curled the end of her long black ponytail lazily around one finger and keeping her eyes on the front of the room, she dug her feet into the ground and slid her desk a few inches to the left. I thought that was kind of unfair. After all, I had never tried to move away from Mary, not even last year after she ate 3 fresh tacos and a blueberry banana smoothie for lunch, and then threw up all over our desks. You think that if I could forgive her for a lap full of purple guck with little bits of chewed up fish floating in it, she could forgive me for being part dinosaur. But I guess not. "Ah, there we go," Miss Filch said, and she finally stood up and turned to face us, remote in hand. "Principal Mathis has asked that we start off the year with a little movie. Every class in the school will be watching this today, but we're the lucky ones. We get to see it first. Ernie, can you get the lights, please?" An excited murmur ran through the room. Movies, even boring ones, were always better than real class. I couldn't turn around enough to see, but Ernie must have managed to get the lights, because a pleasant semi-darkness fell over the room. I could only see vague outlines of all the kids around me. For the first time that morning, I felt myself relax as much as I possibly could in my extremely uncomfortable chair. I even had the cheery thought that maybe, just maybe, the worst part of my day was over. But then Miss Filch started the movie. Oh boy, I wonder what that movie's about. We'll find out tomorrow, guys.